In this video, we're going to look at the workflow for getting GIS files into Illustrator. Here's a relatively simple GIS map I have. You'd see it's mostly polygons, and I've added a point file in there as well, just for variety. So you may already be familiar with the file export command. You should be to export into images, but you can also save it right as an Adobe Illustrator file. I'm going to make sure I'm putting this in my right location for this project. And okay. And this doesn't matter. I'm not saving any raster format. And in fact, I haven't tested it lately, but it used to be that you could not do this process if you had raster imagery in your map. So if you had an aerial you wanted to bring with it, that would make what I'm about to demonstrate not work. I'm not sure if that's still the case. Like I said, I haven't tested it, and these are all moving targets that we deal with. But if that's the case, the workaround is to export it twice. Export the image as one file, and then export your line work as a second file, and then put it back together in Illustrator. So anyway, so I'm not sure. So you can test that and see if that's still the case. But I want to deal with the line work and not with any images right now. So I'm going to go ahead and save that to the Illustrator file format. And the problem, basically, in a nutshell, is that a byproduct of the export is that all these shapes and the text and everything in this, all the content of this map, is put into a series of nested clipping masks. So let's first review, make sure we understand what a clipping mask is. Most simply put, you have something that you want trimmed but not destructively edited. You can use a closed polygon. I'm just going to make this look like a frame, but as I've mentioned many times, it doesn't matter what it looks like, it's going to work either way. And then let's say I want to see the image only within this shape. Select both entities. The frame must be on the top of the thing you want clipped. Right click and make clipping mask. Totally simple, right? Then to edit it, you double click. You enter what's called isolation mode. You'll see this band of gray across the top. And now you can still edit both things individually. Like let's say you actually wanted to see that frame color. You can add a frame color on there. I'll just make it obnoxiously thick so you can see it. You can rotate them independently of each other. Clipping mask is great. A lot of flexibility. And it's non-destructive editing, so that image is still there and all good, right? Okay. I'm going to undo that. Control Z till that's all undone. And I'm going to turn off that layer that the imagery was on. Whoops, Control Z. I'm going to make sure I put my shape on its own layer. Because that's an issue also. All right, so I've got my shape that I'm using as a clipping mask on its own layer. I can turn off my imagery now. Turn off my imagery now. All right, so that's typically done with a picture. You can also, of course, do it with text. Same process. It'll clip that just fine. Everything else works the same. You can go in there and edit that. Not something you would typically want to do, but you can. You can do it with a whole other Illustrator file. Here is an Illustrator file from the first exercise, and this is key. You can clip a whole placed Illustrator file. I'm going to go into isolation mode and just demonstrate that everything is still there and everything is still editable. And this is one of the things you're going to want to do once you start using Illustrator for GIS export. This Illustrator file itself has many layers associated with it. I don't want to lose that layer structure. If I were to bring this file and place it and just sort of make it part of this Illustrator file, all those layers become part of my layers. But you'll notice here, I don't have all these text layers and all these building layers that you may excuse me, you may recall from this exercise. So it's a good way of keeping your final file clear of layering. I don't need 10 layers that I don't want to necessarily edit in this file. So once you start exporting maps, keep them separate and place them into another document. The other problem is that you actually lose your layering capability when you do a clipping mask. So this is on a layer 3. I'm just going to call this text, right? It's on layer 3. Now if I go to clip that, what happens is it takes that text and it's no longer on the text layer, or actually is it? No, so it is. But my mask is no longer on the layer. It combines the two layers, or at least it used to. Maybe it doesn't do that anymore. Let's check. This I need to check. One of the worst problems, like I said, that used to happen is it would, and it did, it put the two of them on the one layer. So that could be a problem. If you have all this layering, okay, here's a better example. Control Z, Control Z. Let's say I had all these things that I was clipping, which is the case when you bring in a map. I've got an Illustrator file, I've got text, and I've got an image, and I want all these things clipped. Here's the example I'm trying to do. It'll do it, but it's just combined all those entities onto one layer, right? So now I've lost my layer control over the individual entities. They're all on one layer, and that's a problem. So take care and know that this is how the clipping mask behaves. All right, I'm not sure if that helped. Let's open our exported Illustrator map, because it's confusing and it's early. And here it is in AI format. You're going to get an error message. Do you want to update? Always say update, or you won't get any text. You'll just get the shapefile. So here we are in Bonafide Illustrator, and notice that we've only got 2 layers. Well, in fact, what's happened is the net result of what this did. It took all these layers and put them on one layer, and that's something that we can't have if we want to manipulate this in any real way. So let's start by talking about what we'd like this map to be, and then take steps to get it there. I want everything on its own layer, ideally. So this means 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 layers of polygons in gradation. This means the red on its own layer, and certainly the text on its own layer, and these trees on their own layer. So I'm going to start with the ideal and just make those layers that I think I want, so I have them. Because the process that I'm going to be showing you basically involves relayering this data, releasing the clipping mask, and then relayering it. If I was doing a project where these values mattered, I might code them into the layer names here, but I'm just gonna gloss over that now, because I don't typically, you don't really care when you're laying this out. The data portion is done. So I need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I'm going to say poly lightest, then 2, 3, poly 4, poly 5, and poly darkest. And I'm putting in lightest and darkest because I'm going to forget. So poly lightest, 2, 3, 4, 5 darkest. Lightest, 2, 3, 4, 5 darkest. That's going to be the bulk of my work, is getting those shapes on their own layers. Now the thing about this is that this file is actually already layered, but it's all in the sublayer area. So you can see if I expand this layers layer, I've got all these sublayers and sublayers inside of other sublayers. And actually, I'm going to edit at this level. I've tried this lots of different ways, and I've decided that the easiest thing to do is to do this editing in the layer dialog. Because you probably know you can select this and right-click and say release clipping mask. Oh, actually, it's not even a... Weird, it's not even an option there. Usually you have release clipping mask or ungroup or something as an option. So like I said, this changes all the time. I'm using, since I first came up with a way of doing this, which I think I figured it out on myself, although there's no great stroke of genius involved. Things change. GIS, this was I don't know, 10 years ago that, if not more, that I first started doing this. So we're many versions of GIS and Illustrator in the future. So the specifics of this have changed over time, and I don't get the privilege and fun of doing this a lot. So we'll explore what's happening. But if we go at the sublayer and see these little icons, they are trying to help us. Looks like the red layers came in okay, right? Let's do this. Let's turn off everything but those red layers and see if that is in fact the case. Looks like it. So that's on a sublayer of the layers. Let's call this something other than layers so we don't go crazy. Let's just call this map stuff. How about raw exported map stuff? So this looks like it might be the easiest. Why don't I just do this first? So here I probably can release the clipping mask. No, I can't. Why not? I expect this to usually be on my right click screen. No release clipping mask. That's weird. That's usually where I find it. So let's see. Maybe it's not clipped. Well, it is clipped, actually. You'll recall, select entities here by using the radio button. What if I select that and it still won't let me release clipping mask? What the hell's going on? Anyway, it doesn't matter. So what I do here is I'll select these individual entities here. Right? I can select one thing here by using the radio button. See, that one shape is selected. So I'm going to shift select. Actually, I'm going to shift select these sub shapes here, the actual shapes. Don't worry if they're not highlighted. I can see they're selected. And I'm going to drag these into the layer that I want them, and that's red outlines. And I'm always going to test it, and it's working. And not only that, you can see they're individually selectable now. And what happened here, this clipping path, that's, as is the case here, when you make a clipping mask, it turns invisible. So keep track of it. I'm going to want to, I don't want a bunch of invisible masks hanging around. I'm going to want to delete it. But in fact, so I can delete that path just by hitting delete. But really, I'm just going to delete that whole layer because I've dealt with it. So I'm simplifying this file, right? So step one, move my shapes to the layer that I want them to be on. I did the red outlines first because it was easier. Let's turn that off and put that out of our mind. Let's go back to the more complex one of these gray shapes, which I believe is going to be all 7 classes of gray shape. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to select the bottom one, and I'm always working from the bottom up here. There's a compound path. That's okay. I don't care about that. Compound path. I don't care about that. I'm not taking the clipping path. I'm just taking the individual paths. The clipping path, that's the shape that we use. That's this thing, right? That's the actual shape that we use to make the clipping mask. And I don't want those anymore. I just want to get rid of them, right? The red shape is the clipping path. So I've got these, I had these selected. I'm going to go ahead and reselect all the paths, but not the clipping mask. And I'm going to drag these to the lightest layer. Doesn't matter. I can start at the darkest. I'm just going to work my way. Well, I said I was working bottom to top, so let me be consistent. I'm going to drag this to the poly darkest layer. Social destination is locked. How can this be? Say OK. I don't see that anything's locked. Drag this to poly darkest, locked or hidden. Oh, it's hidden. That's the problem. Sorry. Okay, dragging it to poly darkest. Locked or hidden is not. Things have changed since I've tried this before. Let's try this. Let's drag this just above the clipping group definition. That's not working either. Oh, is it this? Is it because my layer is... I guess it... Let's see. Darkest. That's weird. So I guess it doesn't work if you can't see them. All right. So I've put all those on poly darkest now. I can get rid of... There's nothing else... Well, let's turn that off for a second. There's nothing else I need from this layer. It's all been dealt with. I'm just going to select and delete it. Contains artwork. That's the invisible clipping path. I can trash that out. If I turn everything on, my map should look basically the same as it did before, and it does except for the text because that's still on the bottom. Right? It's still there. I haven't forgotten about that. But everything else, the shapes and whatnot, should look the same. So let's deal with these shapes first. I'm going to turn off the rest of the stuff and just deal with what I actually have done already. I've unclip masked these shapes here. All I need to do now is sort them lightest to darkest. That's actually pretty easy work. Let me turn off my red outlines. The darkest ones are already on the right layer. Let's start in the other direction now and work the lightest ones. I'm going to select one of the lightest ones. Is that the lightest one? It is. This is the lightest layer. With grays, it's sometimes hard to find out which is which. Okay, so I'm going to select one instance of the lightest shape and then say select same fill color. That'll get me there. I can do fill and stroke, doesn't matter, they should all be the same. So that selects all the lightest shapes, and now I can drag those to the poly lightest layer. And I'll test it, turn it off, and it worked okay. And I'm going to go ahead and turn that off. Things always get a little weird around O'Hare. Don't worry about that. If you assume you're working with Chicago, actually, Anish is probably working with Oak Park, but there's always some weirdness with the O'Hare polys. Now I'll do the same thing again. I'll go with what is my lightest layer now, and this is actually the poly 2. I'll select one instance, go to select same fill color, and drag those up to poly 2. And I'm just being sure to keep track and testing each time. And that's okay. I'll turn that off. You can see what I said about O'Hare being weird. And I'll just keep working down the list. Now this is my next lightest. Select same fill color, and this is poly 3, and I'll turn that off. Lastly, this is lightest now. Select same fill color, move these to poly 4, turn that off, and I'll do the last one. Select same fill color and move these to poly 5. All right, and now I should have my my polys all straight. I got my lightest, check. I've got my next lightest, check. I've got my next lightest, and so on. And my darkest I didn't need to move because everything started on darkest, right? I'm going to turn these off. Actually, I won't. Let me turn those back on. Darkest was fine. Next darkest was fine. Poly 4 also okay. Poly 3 okay. On these two lightest layers, or was it just the lightest layer, I had this weirdness about something with no outline. I forgot now. Where did it go? I thought I had an outline that wasn't on a layer. That's actually, it's looking okay. What's happening is some of these didn't take the outline, right? Basically is what's happening. They seem to be layered okay, but for some reason in the export, and it's nothing I did, everything else has an outline. These didn't have an outline. With all of them selected, I'm going to select all of them. Remember, editing I do to all of them, it's independent of the layering. I'm just going to make sure they all have the same outline. And we'll make it a fine black outline, just so it's consistent. That looks more like it. And test as you go along. Oh, this is what's happening. See, this doesn't have a fill. That's what I was looking at. So what layer is that on? That's on the darkest layer. Doesn't belong there. I'm gonna just delete those. I think it's just a copy of something, right? I noticed that acting weird when when I was doing the editing. And be on the lookout if you're dealing with O'Hare. There's always weird stuff around O'Hare. And these should also be on the layering, but they're not because, oh, do I have anything else on my raw export? I do. Because they were locked in a clipping mask, so they didn't get exported. So where are those? Those are around the other layer. So let's go in the other layer and look at these clip groups. And I'm actually looking for these shapes. There should be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And you can see them. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to first drag those to poly darkest. And now I know that that's poly darkest is okay. Now I know that this should be poly 5. This should be poly 4. This should be poly 3. You know, this is how you actually move stuff from layer to layer. This should be poly 2. And this should be poly lightest. And why is this important? Because the whole reason I brought this into Illustrator is that I want to edit it. So let's say it's all about this poly 2 shape. I can select all those, and I can, maybe these really need to pop. Oh, another bummer is that it messes with the import from GIS messes with your colors and whatnot. So go to the window, swatches, and you can open a swatch library, open swatch library. I'm just going to go with the default for right now, and then you'll have the swatches that you're comfortable with. So let's say these were all, this is what the whole study is about. So I'm going to pop these in like a yellow or something, right? And maybe give it a drop shadow even. Okay, so that's why we bring it into Illustrator, so we can do stuff like this that we can't really do with, what's going on here? How come I'm not seeing drop shadow? Two? Why didn't this take drop shadow? That's weird. Oh, because poly 1's above it. That's why. So now, see what drew my eye? This should have a drop shadow, but it doesn't. That's because, of course, you probably saw this already. Layer order equals drop order. So now I would have to put that layer to the top if I really wanted that effect to work. Doesn't matter. I just put them in order to keep my sanity of lightest to darkest. But visually, if I need it to be on top, it's not a problem. Okay, so my poly shapes, which is really the bulk of this, are taken care of. We can delete that. This is the weird O'Hare stuff. It's there. It's all there. It just has some extra stuff that comes in. Okay, I'm going to turn off all my poly layers. Those are good. Those are taken care of. My red outlines, those are good. Those are taken care of. Now I've just got this miscellaneous stuff to deal with. The text gets weird on the export also. Maybe at this point it'll allow me to just release clipping mask, and it does, and it explodes all this. So I can probably just select this text or not. I'm concerned that there's clipping masks here. If I go to delete, see, it's going to delete stuff I wasn't. It turns out every single piece of text comes with an associated clipping mask. Sometimes you can try this. Select object clipping masks and hit delete. And take care that a bunch of stuff doesn't get deleted, because sometimes that happens. I've never codified when it happens and when it doesn't. But sometimes that's a good shortcut that's going to get you there. So now this text should be more or less freestanding, I think. This still isn't. That's still in a clipping mask. Now it's by itself. You can tell when it's in a clipping mask and when it's by itself, just based on the size of the Windows bounding box. So I'm pretty good. No, something's still in a clipping mask. I think it's just there's an invisible clipping mask here. And let's test it. There it is. There's the invisible clipping mask. I just made it visible. I'm just going to delete that. And again, when you do things like delete, make sure you didn't just lose a bunch of stuff. And it looks okay. I'm not seeing the labeling again because it's covered up. So let me turn off all my polys. And did I delete? I did somehow delete my text. Damn it. It says labels are there. Oh, it's off for some reason. What the hell? Okay, I didn't. Yeah, take care. This is definitely something you don't want to work through as fast as I'm working through it. So this is going to be a bunch of clipping masks too, I believe. It came in its own sub-label called labels, so maybe I can just, again, edit it in the layers dialog. I'm going to shift select everything that looks like just text, drag it into the text layer, and test it, and it's good. Now I'm going to delete that invisible clipping mask, and did you catch that? It deleted the trees also. So I don't want to do that. I'm going to need to go in here and I'm going to have to deal with that on its own. Okay, but here I can delete that clipping path, and it deletes the clip group as well. I can delete this sublayer. There's nothing on it. And keep an eye on, make sure you're not deleting something that's actually good. This labels layer, nothing on it. So why did the trees get put with this other stuff? Well, it turns out, unfortunately, Esri symbols are text. You notice that when you load ArcMap, you have all these new fonts on your computer. That's because this is text. So that's unfortunate because I won't be able to do things like change the stroke and fill because it's actually a font. Anyway, it looks like I needed to make one more layer, and that's for trees. The only reason I brought them in was to make the point that they're actually text. So I'm going to do this the same way. I'm going to do the editing here, shift select, get all those things that's inside the clipping path, and just drag those to my trees layer. And check it. And okay. And I think now we're pretty good. There should be nothing else on my raw export map stuff, and nothing, I don't see any change when I get rid of that, so I can trash that layer out. It says I have stuff on it. What it's got on there is invisible clipping masks. And there we go. That's the entire map now, and I can do stuff in it in Illustrator, like maybe I want reverse printing on my text when it's on a dark path. You know, I do want that. You never would have black text on a dark background like that. You would of course go to reverse printing. And in this exercise is challenging because when do you go to reverse printing? Do you do it here? Do you do it at this level of dark background? That depends. Depends on like other factors. What's going on? Looks like I'm missing a. Oh no, I'm not. That's a color. I thought it was the page I'm seeing. Okay, so this is the essence of the process. It's understanding the clipping mask and dealing with them here. This took half an hour because I've done it before. The first time you do it, it takes a while. Second time you do it, it takes half that time. And it gets faster and faster as you understand what's going on. Another weird thing to be aware of, I usually get weirdness with the font, right? So here it's telling me that this font is 1 point. You know that's not true. I've never figured out how to change that. I'm pretty sure this is like 4 or 5 or 6 point text. Let's test that. I'm going to make some fresh text. Yeah, it's more like 6 or 7 or 8 point, right? That's the actual size. I don't know why it gets weird and thinks it's 1 point, but that's something I've just worked around over the years. And if I select one of these tree symbols, notice it tells me that it's actually a piece of text. It's an Esri default marker. That's one of the that's a typeface. I can change it to I can change this to any font because it's just a piece of text. So change that to Arial. Does it work? Oh, and look, then it knows how big it is too. It turns out it's actually an exclamation point. Ha! All of these are exclamation points in that Esri font. Kind of interesting. Okay, so that's a quick and disorganized lesson in how to do this, and that's the basics of it. If your map is more complex, you'll just have to do these steps more times. Take care that you don't export aerial images like an aerial photo or a base map with these shapes, or I believe you won't be able to edit them in this way. It'll just be a JPEG image. Now, if that's no longer true, you'll figure that out quickly. In fact, we can test that. Let's test that right now. I'm going to add a base. I'm going to add a base map. Why not? If we're going to do it at all, let's do it all the way. So it used to be that the whole thing became a JPEG, and why did I add the highest memory, slowest background when anyone would have done? Okay, so let's see what happens now when we go to File, Export Map, to Illustrator File, and this is going to be E08 with Arial. And let's go back to Illustrator. Still exporting because it's got that massive aerial behind it. Okay. Open. And update. That's about whether the text will come in. Oh, by the way, since the trees are text, I wouldn't have had my text either. So, oh, what do you know? It looks like it's been improved since, okay, I take it back. Looks like you can bring in images. I'm just going to bring these above the clip group. That's all I really need to do. And I can turn off my images. Oh, awesome. So I'm wrong. It's been improved. When I first started doing this process, if you had an image, it wasn't going to you weren't going to be able to edit the shapes. I think that I'd avoid things like transparency. Maybe it was transparency that was the problem. I bet it was transparency because I like to use a lot of transparency when I was drawing. So I bet that's what it is. You don't want to have transparency when you're doing this. So now I've got some transparency on my shapes, and let's try the export one more time. Transparency is really nice. I use it all the time. It's how you can, especially within, if I'm going to go straight publishing from ArcMap, transparency really is one way to make the sort of clunky color and graphics of ArcMap look like something. Unfortunately, I think when I said imagery, I think what I meant to say was Transparency, make sure you don't have any transparency. Let's see, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's all fully editable now. We'll test it one more time. Comprehensive test here. And yeah, that's what it was. It was transparency. See, if I take a piece of the image out, I'm not sure if you saw what just happened, but I tried to move. This image ends up coming in slices. Where did it go? With Arial. Yeah, this image actually comes in slices, the way it's exported, which is fine. You won't see that when you go to print. But when you can see that when I went in, I just went into isolation mode. I went inside the nested image. And you can see that when I move a slice of the image, it's moved the, I don't know why it's doing that, but it's moved the shapes with it. So I'm not going to be able to edit those shapes. Anyway, long story short, take my word for it. Don't have transparency when you export, and it looks like you'll be fine. And it looks like background images are okay. And I think other things also, like gradient, any visual effects will give you the same problem. I think that's just part of the export process. Yeah, this is locked together. These shapes have become part of the image, and that's transparency. So avoid transparency, avoid gradients, avoid all effects in GIS, and you're bringing it into Illustrator. That's where you want to add the effects. Okay, hopefully this helped a little bit. Give it a try. It's not that hard. I'm still only at 37 minutes, so it's a bit of housekeeping. Once you get it out of the way, you've got a fully editable map in Illustrator, and that's not nothing, because you can do all kinds of stuff with this now in Illustrator, and the color is just the least of it. So give it a try. Thanks for watching.